Welcome, dear fans of history, to the larger-than-life saga of HMS Repulse, 1916, a warship so grand she practically demanded her own theme music whenever she steamed into port. Imagine a vessel that managed to outshine rival battlecruisers just by showing up fashionably late to the largest naval war of the early 20th century. And that is only the beginning of her remarkable story. If warships could speak, Repulse might have quipped, "Better late than never, old chap," as she glided across gray, choppy seas. It all begins in January of 1916. The world is knee-deep in the chaos of World War I, and Britain decides it needs more naval muscle. Answering that call, the shipwrights at John Brown and Company set to work on the battlecruiser that would become HMS Repulse. Weighing in at roughly 32,000 tons when fully loaded, give or take a few modest icebergs worth, she was a marvel of steel and steam. Equipped with 6 15-inch guns capable of launching shells the size of small cars, she could hurl destruction up to 20 miles away, a feat so impressive it might leave you questioning the laws of physics. From the outset, Repulse was designed with speed in mind. Traditional battleships of the day preferred thick armor at the expense of agility, but Repulse was all about stepping on the gas pedal. She could crank out nearly 32 knots, about 37 miles per hour, a pace that, while not exactly road trip friendly, was positively lightning fast for something the length of a city block. It was like attaching rocket boosters to a floating fortress. Though she was completed too late to join the fabled Battle of Jutland in 1916, her arrival still stirred excitement. Much like turning up at a party just after the main event, Repulse strolled in ready to impress. The mere presence of a gleaming, state-of-the-art battlecruiser had a way of boosting British morale and compelling German raiders to think twice. After all, who wants to tango with a brand new warship that can outmaneuver and outgun you? During the remainder of World War I, Repulse was assigned the glamorous task of patrolling the North Sea. Granted, she never met the dramatic showdowns that marked the earliest years of the war, but nobody could accuse her of being idle. Whether escorting convoys or deterring potential threats, she was like that watchful guard dog who doesn't bark unnecessarily, but is always ready to pounce if the need arises. Britain, facing submarine dangers and clandestine German raiders, relied heavily on every capital ship to maintain maritime dominance. Repulse fit that bill with gusto. When the guns of World War I finally fell silent in 1918, Repulse settled into a post-war routine that, on the surface, seemed downright peaceful compared to the roiling years just past. But if you think she was left to gather barnacles, think again. The Royal Navy recognized that technology did not stand still, especially not in those restless interwar years. Navy engineers thus subjected Repulse to round after round of upgrades. She was refitted with better fire control systems, advanced gunnery directors, and improved radar, the moment radar technology became something more than science fiction. Armor thickness around critical areas was revisited, ensuring that she could survive the next big conflict, whenever and wherever it might erupt. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Repulse saw duty across various stations, from cooling her heels in the chilly Atlantic to soaking up the sunshine in the Mediterranean. Sailors assigned to her decks often found themselves telling tall tales of how their ship could outrun and outgun anything on the seas, a boast that, while a bit hyperbolic, was not too far from the truth. If you ever met a veteran of HMS Repulse in a seaside pub, you might have been regaled by anecdotes of her daily drills and the comedic mishaps that naturally spring up when hundreds of sailors live together aboard a steel behemoth. The standard jokes about the food, the punishing discipline, and the famously creative ways to pass downtime made for legendary oral histories that rarely made it into official records. The interwar years were not all sunshine and sea shanties, however. The Treaty of Washington, signed in 1922, attempted to limit battleship construction among major naval powers. Repulse, though technically a battlecruiser, was nonetheless affected by the naval disarmament environment that it ushered in. Nonetheless, Britain, anxious to maintain an empire stretching across the globe, kept her proud ships in fighting trim. In that era, battleships and battlecruisers were still seen as the ultimate arbiters of sea power. The concept that large, heavily armed warships could be threatened by anything less than an opposing fleet was something only a few forward-thinking strategists considered. By the late 1930s, with global tensions on the rise once again, Repulse underwent yet another modernization. She was fitted with more anti-aircraft guns, acknowledging that aircraft posed a growing threat. Indeed, airplane technology had advanced dramatically during the interwar years, but many in the Royal Navy remained stubbornly convinced that a well-handled battleship or battlecruiser could simply dodge aerial torpedoes or bombs. After all, Repulse could outrun many surface ships, so why not outrun planes too? That, as events would soon reveal, was a tragically misguided notion. When World War II erupted in 1939, HMS Repulse was back in the thick of things. She served in the Atlantic, escorting convoys from potential German pocket battleships and helping keep the crucial lifelines to the British Isles open. Her silhouette, crowned with those iconic 15-inch guns, was a reassuring sight for Allied merchant crews. She even participated in the hunt for the German battleship Bismarck in 1941, though she did not directly engage that formidable foe. Her presence alone added to the sense that Germany's largest warship was surrounded by a cage of steel and gunfire. This period was not without close calls. German U-boats lurked in the Atlantic, eyeing large ships like Repulse with predatory zeal. On a few occasions, the ship's lookouts spotted periscopes or incoming torpedoes, triggering evasive maneuvers that left sailors clinging to railings and crossing their fingers. Repulse, agile for her size, managed to evade most dangers. But that sense of invulnerability, reinforced by her track record, may have lulled some into overconfidence. The British Admiralty recognized that Japan, allied with Germany, posed a grave threat in the Pacific. By late 1941, diplomatic relations had soured to the point of no return. The Royal Navy dispatched a powerful task force to deter Japanese aggression, designated Force Z. It included the brand-new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, fresh off her confrontation with the Bismarck, and the seasoned battlecruiser HMS Repulse. Admiral Sir Tom Phillips took command of this formidable duo, along with accompanying destroyers. Their mission, to show Japan that Britain stood ready to defend its interests in Southeast Asia. Repulse's crew anticipated a change of scenery. Jungles, tropical heat, and the swirling monsoons of Malaya were a far cry from the grim gray of the North Atlantic. Morale was generally good. Sailors cracked jokes about trading their woolen caps for straw hats. Many looked forward to the perceived side theater of the war, not realizing how close the conflict was to exploding in their faces. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, devastating the U.S. Pacific battleship force. Britain, having intelligence that Japan was on the move, readied Force Z. Their aim was to intercept Japanese landings along the coast of Malaya. Almost immediately, they realized the odds were stacked against them, aware that they lacked adequate air cover, since the sole aircraft carrier, HMS Indomitable, was unavailable. Admiral Phillips relied on speed, surprise, and the hope that Japanese pilots would find hitting fast-moving battleships at sea too challenging. As Repulse and Prince of Wales steamed through tropical waters, tension hung in the humid air. The men on board tried to keep things lighthearted. Practical jokes abounded, like swapping sugar for salt in the galley. Nothing malicious, just a bit of silliness to break the tension. However, the sense that something massive and terrifying was about to unfold never fully disappeared. December 10, 1941, dawned with an uneasy calm. Even the weather seemed to be holding its breath. Japanese reconnaissance planes, however, quickly spotted Force Z, relaying the information to bomber and torpedo squadrons stationed nearby. Soon, the sky above the British ships hummed with the drone of incoming aircraft. Some historians claim the attacking Japanese force numbered over 80 planes, an overwhelming assault, to say the least. Repulse's crew, well-drilled and determined, manned their anti-aircraft guns. With magazines loaded and hearts pounding, they took aim at the swarms of incoming planes. The men had faith in their ship. After all, she had dodged torpedoes before, outrun enemy vessels and stayed afloat through so many perils. They believed, sincerely, that if any ship could slip away unscathed from aerial torment, it would be Repulse. At first, it seemed they might be right. Repulse zipped through the ocean, making sharp turns that left massive wakes. Several torpedoes churned the sea behind her, missing by mere yards. The huge bombs dropped from level bombers thundered overhead, but Repulse, with her speedy maneuvers, evaded many of them. It must have been a breathtaking spectacle, if you were not on the receiving end. Prince of Wales was hit early in the attack, a blow that slowed her and made her an easier target. Repulse tried to draw some of the fire away, continuing to swerve with a grace that belied her size. Crews on both ships watched in horror as bombs and torpedoes found their mark on Prince of Wales. Meanwhile, Repulse, narrowly avoiding repeated strikes, gave her adversaries a run for their money. The moment had the drama of a cat-and-mouse chase, except the cat was in the air, and the mouse was a heavily armed but ultimately outclassed warship. Eventually, the luck that had so often smiled on Repulse turned sour. A well-coordinated torpedo run by Japanese aircraft cornered her, making it impossible to evade the lethal packages. Torpedoes crashed into her hull, ripping open her side and letting the sea rush in. Bulkheads groaned, the lights flickered, alarms blared. Still, the men fought to keep her afloat, sealing off flooded compartments, returning anti-aircraft fire, and hoping that somehow Repulse would do what she had always done, shrug off the damage and soldier on. But even a battlecruiser has limits. As the hull breaches widened, more water poured in, and Repulse began to list dangerously to one side. Captain William Tennant ordered abandon ship, though many brave souls stayed behind to help others or to carry out final tasks. It was a scene both heroic and tragic. Some men jumping into the oil-slicked sea, others clinging to rails, singing bits of songs to steady their nerves or sharing quick jokes amid the chaos. At 12:33 p.m., only a short time after the attack began, HMS Repulse capsized and sank. Over 500 men went down with her, though miraculously many were rescued by destroyers that rushed in after the raid. The water, still churned by the sounds of battle, carried lifeboats, debris, and shock. Prince of Wales followed Repulse to the bottom soon after, sealing the fate of Force Z. The once proud British capital ships, harbingers of naval dominance, had fallen not to the big-gun slugfests of old, but to a concentrated air assault. The impact on British morale was immediate and crushing. News of the sinkings traveled fast, overshadowed only by the shock still reverberating from Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, the unstoppable aura of the battleship was shattered. Traditional naval doctrine, which had insisted that no mere airplanes could sink a modern capital ship in open seas, lay in tatters. The age of air power was here, and it had announced itself with devastating clarity. The irony? HMS Repulse, that swift, agile wonder, had been taken down by the very threat her modernization had only partly addressed. The immediate aftermath was grim. Survivors were brought to Singapore, some badly burned, others emotionally shattered. They carried stories of courage and heartbreak, accounts of men who gave their life jackets to wounded crewmates, a final wave's goodbye amid roaring flames and swirling water. For the Royal Navy, the lessons were brutal and swift. Air cover was no longer optional, and underestimating an enemy's aerial might was the quickest route to disaster. In many respects, the sinking of HMS Repulse and Prince of Wales marked a turning point in World War II. Their loss crippled British naval power in the region, accelerating the fall of Malaya and eventually Singapore. It also validated Japan's combined arms approach, which leveraged naval aviation to supplement or even supplant conventional surface action. By the time the Allies regrouped and adapted, precious months had been lost, and the Japanese war machine had surged forward. In the decades after the war, while the world transitioned from the era of dreadnoughts to the supremacy of aircraft carriers and submarines, the wrecks of Repulse and Prince of Wales remained under the waters of the South China Sea. Divers who explored the site in later years reported a haunting but humbling scene: a massive hull lying on the seafloor, heavy guns, silent but still imposing. The wreck is recognized as a war grave, a reminder of the men who never escaped those flooded compartments. Many memorial services have been held aboard modern vessels passing over the site, with wreaths cast into the water bugles sounding the last post, and veterans or descendants paying respects to lost loved ones. The name Repulse, once a source of pride and reassurance, had become enshrined in maritime memory as a testament to the unpredictability of war, the inevitability of technological change, and the gallantry of ordinary sailors placed in extraordinary circumstances. Beyond the grim aspects of her final battle, the story of HMS Repulse offers lighter tidbits. Old diaries and letters from crew members reveal the everyday humor that thrived on board. One letter from a young sailor recounted how a petty officer once threatened to turn a recalcitrant cook's mate into cannon fodder if he kept undercooking the potatoes. Another snippet recalled the ship's cat, who seemed to have an uncanny knack for disappearing whenever the bosun came around, leading to speculation that the cat was more intelligent than half the crew combined. These small glimpses into naval life highlight the universal truth that even in times of war, humanity's capacity for laughter endures. Repulse's voyages spanned over 2 tumultuous decades, from the final throes of World War I to some of the darkest days of World War II. She symbolized both the grandeur of the Royal Navy at its apex and the painful lessons learned when tradition fails to keep pace with innovation. The comedic irony is that so much painstaking engineering had been invested to protect the ship from enemy gunfire that it left her ill-prepared for aerial torpedoes and bombs. Hindsight, of course, is 20/20, but back then, few truly grasped the potential for aircraft to challenge the battleship's reign. Today, the name Repulse resonates among naval historians, diving enthusiasts, and families of the men who served aboard. She remains part of that storied generation of warships that bridged the gap between the old and new, combining the romantic image of big gun dreadnought battles with the uncomfortable reality of air power's meteoric ascent. In many ways, the repulse that matters most now is humanity's repulsion at the tragic cost of war, the loss of life, and the heartbreak of families who never saw their loved ones return. If you ever find yourself flipping through a history book, or let's be honest, browsing online articles about the naval battles of World War II, pause for a moment when you reach the story of HMS Repulse. Envision the lines of her hull slicing through the open sea under a blazing sun, her guns glinting like silent sentinels, the men inside going about their daily tasks with a mix of discipline and lighthearted banter. Then picture that same ship waltzing with danger off Malaya, weaving nimbly to evade the bombs and torpedoes raining down. The final image may be heartbreaking, but it serves as a powerful tribute to the men who fought valiantly against impossible odds and the unstoppable march of progress. In the end, HMS Repulse wasn't just a warship. She was an experience. She carried with her the hopes, fears, and patriotic fervor of a generation that believed in the might of steel and the wits of her sailors. She managed to stand proud through one world war, only to find a drastically changed battlefield in the next. Her story is a reminder that history is not simply about who wins or loses. It is about the transitions, the leaps in technology, and the lives caught in between. Hers is a story of courage, comedic resilience, and ultimately of transformation. And so, as we reflect on the life and times of HMS Repulse, perhaps we can all share a quiet, respectful laugh at the incredible speed, the monstrous guns, the phone upgrade-like refits, and the inexorable tide of history that swept her away. The ocean might forget many ships, but it certainly will not forget this one, nor should we. The legend of HMS Repulse stands as one of the most compelling chapters in World War II naval lore and a sobering testament to the evolution of warfare. Remembering such lesser-known World War II battles reminds us that history is more than just dates and statistics. It is stories of determination, sacrifice, and innovation in the face of danger. If you are as fascinated by naval history as we are, take a moment to share this journey with someone who loves war stories. And why stop there? Join our voyage into the hidden corners of our past. Subscribe to keep exploring the unknown stories waiting to be discovered.